The Merlot was cheap, acidic against my tongue, a stark contrast to the view from my 34th floor window. The city lights below blurred into a galaxy of obligations I didn't want to meet. I was exhausted by the performance of modern romance, the endless swiping that felt more like data entry than connection. My thumb hovered over the Get button for Apex. It was the latest obsession in the financial district, an invite-only fortress for executives who treated marriage like a merger. I downloaded it out of spite, a cynical prank to mock the pretension of seeking a portfolio partner. I uploaded a faceless photo, a silhouette against a boardroom window. Then, the ping. It cut through the silence of my apartment. A match. No photo, just a black background, and the initials ST. The bio was a single line. Unyielding precision. Do not waste my time. I smirked, the wine making me brave, and typed a flippant greeting about market volatility. The screen went dark, but the notification lingered in my mind, a small hook caught in the fabric of my evening. I fell asleep with the phone on my chest, unaware that I had just invited a predator into my sanctuary. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a margin call. The investment bank's conference room was a sterile box of glass and tension, smelling faintly of stale coffee and high-functioning anxiety. 40 of us sat around the mahogany table, analysts and associates clutching their tablets like shields. The hum of the trading floor outside was a distant, chaotic ocean, but in here, the silence was absolute. We were waiting for her. The temperature seemed to drop the moment the double doors swung open. Selena Topuria didn't walk. She executed movement with terrifying efficiency. She was the managing director, the shark of the division, a woman who could dismantle a career with a raised eyebrow. She wore charcoal wool tailored to a dangerous perfection, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot that exposed the sharp line of her jaw. She took her seat at the head of the table, and the air in the room thickened, heavy with the weight of her expectations. She didn't say hello. She simply opened her folder, and the briefing began. I sat in the third row, wedged between a nervous junior analyst and a window that offered no escape. My head throbbed, a lingering reminder of the cheap wine and the late hour. Selena's voice was low, a smooth contralto that carried without effort, dissecting the Q3 projections with brutal clarity. She tore through the numbers, exposing weaknesses in the strategy with surgical precision. I zoned out, fixing my gaze on the dust motes dancing in the projector beam, trying to disappear into the beige upholstery. The room was a pressure cooker, but I was just trying to survive until lunch. My phone buzzed against the table. It was a single, illicit vibration, loud enough to sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. I froze. Selena was mid-sentence, critiquing a risk assessment model. I slid my hand over the device, pulling it into my lap with agonizing slowness. I shouldn't have looked. I knew the rules. But the screen lit up with a notification from Apex. You look bored in the third row. The breath left my lungs in a rush. The world narrowed down to those 7 words. My heart hammered against my ribs, a violent, traitorous rhythm that I was sure echoed in the silence. It wasn't possible. It was a coincidence. A prank. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. Another buzz. And your posture is terrible. Sit up. I looked up, terrified. Selena Topuria was still speaking, her voice steady, her demeanor icy. She was looking at the projection screen, pointing out a flaw in the yield curve. But then, as if she felt the weight of my gaze, she turned. She didn't stop talking. She didn't falter. But her dark eyes locked onto mine across the crowded room. For a fraction of a second, the corner of her mouth quirked upward, a barely imperceptible smirk. It was a secret signal, a direct line of fire. The air between us didn't just shift. It evaporated. I sat up straight, my spine snapping into alignment as if she had pulled a string. The heat rushed to my face, burning under the fluorescent lights. The shark wasn't just circling the water. She was in my pocket, watching me from the head of the table. The boardroom had just become a hunting ground, and I was the only one who knew the game had started. The week dissolved into a haze of caffeine and adrenaline. We called the conference suite the War Room, a glass-walled aquarium on the 40th floor where sunlight was filtered through UV-coated windows and ambition. The air was cold, smelling of dry erase markers, cooling takeout, and the metallic tang of high-stakes fear. Stacks of pitch decks grew like unstable towers on the mahogany table, monuments to our exhaustion. Selena was the architect of our misery. She was relentless, a machine of efficiency who seemed to exist without sleep or sustenance. By day, she dismantled my financial models with the dispassionate cruelty of a surgeon removing a limb. She would stand at the head of the room, laser pointer cutting through the dim light, and demand I justify every assumption, every decimal point in the valuation. She stripped my logic bare in front of the partners, finding the smallest hairline fractures in my arguments and forcing me to rebuild them while the clock ticked down. But the nights were a secret battlefield. My phone would buzz against the polished wood of my desk, a vibration that felt like a caress in the sterile silence. You hesitated on the EBITDA multiple. Don't let them see you bleed. I would look up, heart hammering, to see her at the other end of the room, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop, completely impassive. It was a psychological siege. She was tearing me down professionally while building a strange, intimate architecture between us digitally. Your tie is crooked. Fix it. I'd type back under the table, the risk of discovery adding a sharp spike of dopamine to my exhaustion. It's 2 a.m. No one is looking at my tie. STIM. The proximity became a weapon. On Wednesday night, we were the last two left in the war room. The city outside was a grid of darkness and distant lights, but inside, the fluorescent glare was unforgiving. I was hunched over a spreadsheet, trying to salvage a slide she had decimated an hour earlier. I didn't hear her approach. I only felt the shift in the room's gravity, the sudden electric charge of her nearness. She leaned over my shoulder to look at the screen. She didn't touch me, not skin to skin, but the heat radiating from her body was a physical weight against my back. Her perfume filled my senses, a sophisticated, heady mix of sandalwood and cold rain that drowned out the stale office air. It was intoxicating and terrifying. Her hand reached past me to point at a cell on the screen, her wrist inches from my cheek. I could see the delicate blue vein beneath her pale skin, a pulse beating a slow, steady rhythm that mocked the frantic racing of my own heart. "This projection is optimistic," she murmured, her voice vibrating near my ear, low and intimate. "You're assuming the market won't correct." "I'm assuming we can weather the correction," I managed to say, my voice tighter than I wanted, fighting the urge to lean back into her. She pulled back, the loss of her warmth leaving a phantom chill on my skin. She walked away without another word. A moment later, my phone lit up. "Your defiance is your best feature. Don't lose it." That message became my anchor. By Thursday morning, the exhaustion had stripped away my filter. We were in the final strategy session. The partners, men in gray suits who had been trading since the 80s, were nodding along to Selena's plan for a hostile acquisition. It was a scorched earth tactic. Efficient, brutal, classic Selena. But it was wrong. "It won't work," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. The hum of the projector fan seemed to roar. The partners turned to stare at me with a mixture of pity and horror. "You didn't interrupt the shark. You certainly didn't tell her she was wrong." Selena slowly turned her chair to face me. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of porcelain and steel. "Explain," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "The regulatory backlash will kill the deal," I said, my voice steady. "We need a soft entry. We need to woo the board, not besiege them. If we go hostile, the talent walks. We buy a shell." The room held its breath. I had just challenged the queen in her own court. Selena's eyes searched mine, looking for weakness. I didn't blink. I held her gaze, channeling the unyielding precision she claimed to value. Then her eyes gleamed, a flash of genuine approval that cut through the tension. "Rewrite the proposal," she said to the room, never breaking eye contact with me. "We do it her way." She didn't fire me. She waited until everyone else had left. The charity gala was a cage gilded in gold leaf. The Metropolitan Museum had been transformed into a holding pen for the city's financial elite, a cavernous space echoing with the clink of crystal and the murmur of seven-figure deals disguised as small talk. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne that cost more than my rent, weaving through a sea of tuxedos and designer silk. It was a masquerade where everyone wore their own faces, but the smiles were the masks. I stood near a marble pillar, swirling a glass of sparkling water, watching the sharks feed on hors d'oeuvres and gossip. I felt like an anthropologist, studying a particularly aggressive species of predator. Or maybe just a fraud, wrapped in borrowed velvet, waiting for security to realize I didn't have the pedigree to be here. Then the crowd parted, not out of politeness, but out of instinctual deference. Selena Taporia stood at the top of the grand staircase. If the boardroom was her battlefield, this was her victory lap. She wore a gown of midnight blue liquid silk that clung to her frame with architectural precision. The back cut dangerously low to expose the sharp, elegant line of her spine. She didn't look like she was attending a party. She looked like she owned the building and was graciously allowing us to rent the air. She moved through the room, accepting tributes in the form of handshakes and air kisses, her expression bored, detached, and utterly captivating. She was a weapon sheathed in silk, and I couldn't look away. I tried to retreat into the shadows of the Egyptian wing, but gravity doesn't work that way. She found me at the bar 10 minutes later. The air shifted before she even spoke. That familiar drop in temperature, the scent of sandalwood cutting through the cloying perfume of 100 socialites. "You clean up well," she said, her voice a low hum that vibrated in my chest. She wasn't looking at me. She was watching the room, a glass of dark red wine in her hand. "I try to blend in with the scenery," I replied, keeping my eyes forward. "Less risk of being eaten. Some of us prefer the hunt to the meal." She turned then, her eyes sweeping over me, lingering on the neckline of my dress. It wasn't a sexual look, not exactly. It was an appraisal, an asset valuation. "We're discussing a merger," she said, nodding toward a pair of CEOs arguing in the corner. "Though I suspect one of them will be liquidated by morning." I took a sip of water, my throat suddenly dry. Hostile takeover? Inevitably. Most partnerships are just power struggles with better catering. She stepped closer, the low timbre of her voice cutting under the chatter, vibrating against my ear. "What about you? Are you looking for a merger or just an acquisition?" The double meaning hung in the air, heavy and sweet. "I'm just trying to survive the fiscal year, Selena." Liar. The noise of the party became suffocating. Without a word, she tilted her head toward the terrace doors. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. I followed. Outside, the October air was crisp, biting at my bare arms. The city sprawled below us, a grid of electricity and ambition. We stood at the stone railing, the glass doors muffling the laughter inside. The distance between us was charged, a magnetic field I was terrified to cross. "Why haven't you deleted it?" she asked suddenly. I didn't need to ask what she meant. "I thought it was a joke, a prank." "Apex isn't a joke. It's a tool." She set her glass on the ledge. "And you didn't download it to mock us. You downloaded it because you're lonely, and you're tired of people who don't understand the cost of this life." Her words stripped me bare. "And you? ST, unyielding precision?" "I saw your profile the second it went live," she said, turning to face me. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of her face, softening the shark into something almost human. Silhouette against the window. I knew it was your apartment. I knew it was you. My heart stuttered. "You knew? The whole time? During the meetings? The texts?" "Of course I knew." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I don't make blind investments. I wanted to see if you had the nerve to play the game. And here you are," she whispered, standing in the cold with me, while the rest of them pretend to be happy. The tension between us was a physical thing, a wire pulled so tight it hummed. "I should go," I said, though my feet didn't move. "Yes," she agreed. "You should." She signaled to the valet before we even reached the curb. When the sleek black town car pulled up, gleaming under the streetlights, I expected her to get in and leave me there. Instead, the driver held the door open, and she simply looked at me. It wasn't a question. It was the next move on the board. She didn't ask if I needed a ride. She simply opened the door to the dark interior, waiting for me to decide if I was brave enough to step inside. The heavy click of the door latch sealed us inside a capsule of silence and expensive leather. The chaotic noise of the gala, the clinking glasses, the forced laughter, the jazz quartet, vanished instantly, replaced by the low, steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic thrum of rain beginning to streak against the tinted glass. It felt less like a vehicle and more like a confession booth, moving at 30 miles per hour through the veins of the city. The partition was up. The driver was a ghost. It was just the two of us, suspended in the dark. Selena shifted in her seat, the midnight blue silk of her gown rustling like a whisper in the confined space. For the first time in the 6 months I had worked under her, I saw her shoulders drop. She exhaled a long, slow breath, leaning her head back against the headrest. In the intermittent flashes of amber streetlight that cut through the window, the shark looked tired. Not weak, never that, but human. The armor of the boardroom dissolved in the shadows, leaving behind a woman who was terrifyingly real. "You're analyzing the risk," she said. It wasn't a question. She didn't open her eyes. Her voice was lower now, stripped of the projection she used to command meetings. It was a voice meant for dark rooms and secrets. "I'm calculating the fallout," I corrected, my hands gripping the seat edge to keep them from trembling. "There are rules, Selena, HR policies, ethical guidelines, the fact that you sign my performance reviews." "I don't make mistakes," she said, turning her head slowly to look at me. The darkness made her eyes look black, bottomless. "And I don't start fires I can't control." "Is that what this is?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "A fire?" "It's a negotiation." She shifted, turning her body toward me. The space between us on the bench seat was a chasm of perhaps 6 inches, but the tension bridging it was thick enough to choke on. And currently, we're at an impasse. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The scent of her, sandalwood, rain, and the faint, expensive minerality of the champagne she hadn't finished, filled the car. It was overwhelming. "I don't know what you want from me. Don't lie. It's beneath you." Her gaze dropped to my hands, then traveled up to my throat, lingering on the pulse I knew was visible there. "You know exactly what I want. You've known since the first message. But I need to know if you're brave enough to give it." "This isn't an app," I said, the words feeling fragile. "I can't just delete the account if this goes wrong." "No," she agreed softly. "You can't." She moved then, not closer, but shifting her posture so she was facing me fully. Her hand rested on the leather seat between us, fingers curled, relaxed. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to reach out and touch her. The distance was negligible, but the psychological barrier was a mile high. If I touched her, I wasn't just touching a woman I was attracted to. I was touching my career, my reputation, my boss. "I want to touch you," she said. The words were stated with the same factual calm she used to announce a quarterly loss, which made them infinitely more dangerous. "I want to slide my hand up your knee. I want to feel if your skin is as warm as it looks. I want to know if you shiver when I take control, or if you fight back like you do in the war room." The air left my lungs. My body reacted instantly, a flush of heat sweeping through me that had nothing to do with the car's climate control. "Selena, but I won't," she continued, her eyes locking onto mine, unflinching. "I won't cross that line. Not unless you tell me to. Not unless you explicitly invite the breach." The rain intensified, drumming a chaotic rhythm against the roof, sealing us further into this private, charged reality. The power dynamic had shifted. She was giving me the weapon, the choice. She was the predator, waiting for the prey to open the gate. "You're asking me to give you permission to ruin me," I whispered. "I'm asking you for permission to know you," she countered. "To stop pretending that this electricity between us is just professional friction. I'm asking you to be honest about what you want." I looked at her hand on the seat. I looked at the curve of her lips, which were parted slightly, waiting. The fear was still there, sharp and cold, but the desire was a rising tide that drowned it out. I was tired of the safety of the shore. I wanted the storm. "Do it," I breathed. The words were barely audible, but in the silence of the car, they sounded like a shout. "Be specific," she murmured, her voice dropping an octave, turning rough. "Tell me what I can do." "Touch me," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I want you to touch me." She didn't hesitate. She didn't rush. She moved with that terrifying, elegant precision that defined her. Her hand lifted from the leather and settled on my knee. The contact was electric. Her palm was warm, heavy, grounding. It wasn't a tentative touch. It was a claim. Her fingers curled around the fabric of my dress, the pressure firm, possessive. I gasped, the sound involuntary, and her eyes flared with a dark, satisfied hunger. She didn't move her hand higher. She just held me there, anchoring me to the moment, to her. "Is this okay?" she asked, her thumb tracing a slow, maddening circle against the inside of my knee. "Yes," I managed to choke out. "God, yes." The car began to slow, the momentum shifting as we turned onto my street. The spell wavered but didn't break. Her hand stayed on my knee until the very last second, until the car rolled to a stop in front of my building. She pulled back slowly, the loss of her touch leaving a physical ache, a cold spot on my skin that burned. "We stopped too soon," she said, her voice smooth again, the mask sliding back into place as the driver shifted the car into park. But her eyes remained dark, dilated, full of unfinished business. "Yes," I agreed, reaching for the door handle with a trembling hand. "We did." "Monday," she said, the word sounding like both a promise and a threat. "Don't be late." I stepped out into the rain, the cool water hitting my flushed skin, but I was still burning. The car pulled away, disappearing into the wet city night, leaving the air around me thick with everything we hadn't done. If the car ride was a fever dream, Monday morning was the ice bath. I walked into the office with my nerves singing, skin still humming with the phantom memory of her hand on my knee. I expected a look, a signal, a microscopic nod that acknowledged the shift in our tectonic plates. I expected the shark to acknowledge that she had tasted blood. Instead, I got a ghost. Selena didn't just ignore me. She erased me. In the morning briefing, her gaze slid over me like I was made of glass. She directed questions to the analyst on my left, then the associate on my right, carving a silhouette around me with surgical precision. When I spoke up to clarify a data point on the Q3 projections, she didn't even look up from her tablet. She simply said, "Noted," in a voice so flat it could have been synthesized, and moved on to the next slide. The whiplash was violent. I sat at my desk for hours, staring at a spreadsheet until the numbers blurred into meaningless gray static. My phone sat silent on the desk. No notifications, no teasing critiques of my posture, no ST appearing in the black void of the app. The digital lifeline had been cut. By Wednesday, the silence had curdled into insecurity. I started dissecting the memory of Saturday night, looking for the flaw. Had I been too eager? Had my breathless yes in the back of the town car been too desperate, too unrefined for a woman who treated intimacy like a high-stakes acquisition? Maybe it was a test, and I had failed by yielding too quickly. Maybe the thrill for her was the chase, and by letting her touch me, I had killed the game. I felt foolish, exposed, a junior analyst who had mistaken a predator's curiosity for affection. Then, darker variables entered the equation. Julian Vance, a director for mergers and acquisitions, had been circling my desk for weeks. He was the kind of man who wore his ambition like too much cologne. Loud, cloying, and impossible to ignore. He thrived on the rumor mill and seemed to sense that my standing with Selena was on shaky ground. On Thursday afternoon, he made his move. I was in the break room, waiting for the espresso machine to grind through its noisy cycle, when he leaned against the counter next to me. He was too close. He always was. "You look tired," he said, his voice pitched to that fake solicitous tone corporate climbers use before they stick a knife in your back. "Taporia running you into the ground?" "I'm fine, Julian," I said, focusing on the slow drip of the coffee. "Just end of quarter volume. She burns through people, you know. Uses them up, spits them out." He reached out, his hand brushing against my upper arm, fingers lingering on the fabric of my blouse. It was a gesture meant to be comforting, but it felt possessive, slimy. "My team is looking for fresh blood, better hours, better bonuses, and a boss who actually appreciates talent." I stiffened, pulling my arm away. But the break room was small, and he was blocking the exit. "I'm happy where I am. Are you?" He stepped closer, dropping his voice. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're drowning, and she's just watching it happen." The air pressure in the room plummeted. "Julian." The name was spoken softly, but it cracked through the room like a whip. We both froze. Selena was standing in the doorway. She wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were fixed on Julian's hand, which was still hovering in the space where my arm had been. She stood perfectly still, her posture relaxed, but the energy radiating off her was lethal. It was the stillness of a viper before the strike. "Selena," Julian said, his smile faltering but not disappearing. He straightened up, trying to reclaim his height. "Just checking on the troops." "You ride them hard." "I expect excellence," she said, her voice smooth, devoid of any warmth. She stepped into the room, forcing Julian to back up against the counter. "What I don't expect is for mediocrity to come poaching in my department." Julian's face flushed. "I was just making conversation." "You were touching my analyst," she corrected, her tone dropping to a register that vibrated in the floorboards. "If I see you in her orbit again, I won't go to HR. I'll go to the risk committee and explain exactly why your portfolio is a liability waiting to be liquidated. Do we understand each other?" Julian swallowed hard. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a very small man in a very expensive suit. Crystal clear. He squeezed past her, practically running out the door. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Thank you. He's been—" "Don't," she cut me off. She turned on me, and the mask finally cracked. It wasn't indifference I saw in her eyes. It was fury. And beneath the fury, a terrifying, possessive hunger. She closed the distance between us in 2 strides, backing me into the counter where Julian had just been. But this felt different. This wasn't entrapment. It was gravity. "Why did you let him get that close?" she hissed, her hands gripping the edge of the granite counter on either side of my hips, caging me in. "I didn't let him—" "You didn't stop him," she countered, her eyes searching my face, frantic and wild. "I watched him touch you. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "I thought you didn't care," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You've ignored me all week. I thought I was just a bad investment you were trying to write off." "Ignored you?" She laughed, a short, sharp sound that lacked any humor. "I've been staying away because if I get within 10 feet of you, I lose the ability to think about anything else. I'm trying to maintain control, and you're letting mid-level managers paw at you in the break room." "He didn't mean anything. He wanted what is mine," she growled. The silence that followed was heavy. She froze, realizing what she had said. She pulled back slowly, her expression tightening into something unreadable, but her chest was rising and falling too fast. "I need to review the Q3 deck," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "There are discrepancies." "Now?" I asked, breathless. "Tonight," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Midnight. My office. Bring the files." She turned and walked out, leaving me alone with the cooling coffee and the realization that the cold shoulder hadn't been a rejection. It had been a dam holding back a flood, and the water was rising fast. The building at midnight was a tomb of glass and steel, kept alive only by the low-frequency hum of the server rooms and the rhythmic sweep of cleaning crews 3 floors down. I walked through the bullpen, past the silent rows of monitors that looked like sleeping eyes, reflecting the city lights in dark, distorted rectangles. It felt illicit just being there, a trespasser in the Temple of Commerce after the priests had gone home. Her office was the only beacon at the end of the corridor, a glowing aquarium suspended against the black backdrop of the skyline. The door was ajar, spilling a slice of yellow light across the carpet, inviting and foreboding in equal measure. I entered without knocking. Selena stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the city she usually commanded. But tonight, she looked like she was searching for an escape route. She had removed her blazer, draping it over the back of her Eames chair. The silk blouse underneath was sleeveless, a deep charcoal that exposed the tension in her arms and the sharp, elegant line of her shoulders. She looked wrecked, beautiful, and terrifyingly alert. The Q3 deck was spread across the mahogany desk, a chaotic fan of charts, graphs, and risk assessments that neither of us intended to read. "Page 14, she said, her voice tight, skipping the pleasantries. She didn't turn around. "Your assessment of the liquidity risk." I walked to the desk, placing my hands on the cool leather surface, leaning in. "What about it?" "It's reckless," she murmured, finally turning to face me. She walked to the desk and traced a trend line with a manicured nail, but her eyes weren't on the data. They were on my hands. You're suggesting we leverage everything on a volatile asset with no historical data to support the valuation. You're suggesting we go in unprotected. The historical data is irrelevant, I replied, my voice steady despite the thudding of my heart. The market has changed. If we play it safe, we stagnate. If we want the yield, we have to accept the exposure. She looked up then, her eyes dark and heavy, stripping away the layers of corporate jargon to address the heat rising between us. Exposure leaves you vulnerable. It means if the market turns, you have nothing to hide behind. You lose everything. Or you win everything, I countered. High risk, high reward. Isn't that the philosophy you taught me? Not when the asset is unstable. She pushed the papers aside, the motion sudden and violent. The spreadsheets slid onto the floor, a cascade of white noise that we both ignored. The desk was no longer a workspace. It was a barrier she was desperate to remove. She walked around the edge of the mahogany, closing the distance between us until the air pressure in the room seemed to drop. I am not unstable, Selena. I'm just the one variable you can't put in a spreadsheet. That's exactly what makes you dangerous, she whispered. She stopped inches from me, and the scent of sandalwood overwhelmed the sterile office air, dizzying and rich. I don't do this. I don't mix the portfolio. I keep my assets separate because I need absolute, unyielding control. And now? Now I can't find the door, she admitted, the confession torn from her throat. Her composure was fracturing, the steel in her spine dissolving. I look at you and I forget the strategy. I forget the risk management protocols. All I can think about is how much I want to dismantle that composure of yours and see what's underneath. She was trembling. The shark, the woman who made grown men cry in board meetings, was shaking because she was standing next to me. The realization gave me a surge of power, a heady cocktail of confidence that overrode my fear. I wasn't the analyst anymore. I was the volatility she couldn't hedge against. I reached out, not asking for permission this time, and took her hand. It was ice cold. I pulled her closer until our bodies were brushing, the silk of her blouse creating a static charge against my skin. Then stop managing, I said, my voice low. Stop trying to control the outcome. You're exhausted, Selena. You've been holding up the sky for this entire firm for 10 years. Put it down. If I let go, everything collapses, she breathed, her eyes searching mine, wide and panicked. Let it collapse, I challenged. Let it burn. I'm not interested in the firm. I'm interested in you. I stepped forward, forcing her back until her hips hit the edge of the desk. The power dynamic flipped. She gasped, a sharp intake of air, but she didn't push me away. Her hands came up to grip my shoulders, not to shove, but to hold on, as if the floor had just dropped out. You have no idea what you're doing, she warned, though the threat lacked any teeth. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said. I'm acquiring the asset. I leaned in, brushing my lips against the pulse point of her neck. She made a sound, a low, broken whimper that shattered the last of her professional facade. Tell me to stop, I whispered against her skin. Give me the order, boss. Tell me to leave. Her fingers dug into my arms, bruising, desperate. She tilted her head back, exposing her throat, a gesture of absolute surrender. Don't you dare, she hissed. The papers were forgotten, pushed aside for something far more volatile. The euphoria of our collision lasted exactly 48 hours before reality breached the perimeter. We had been careful, or so we thought. We left the building separately, arrived 10 minutes apart, and kept the office door open during briefings. But intimacy is difficult to sanitize. It lingers in the micro expressions, in the gravitational pull that occurs when two bodies occupy the same room. We were arrogant, drunk on the secret we shared, assuming that because we were the smartest people in the building, we were also invisible. It wasn't the security cameras or the IT department that caught us. It was a junior associate named Marcus, a 22-year-old with a bad suit and too much ambition. It happened on a Tuesday evening. I was in Selena's office, dropping off a revised pitch deck. The blinds were drawn against the setting sun, casting long, bruised shadows across the carpet. I placed the file on her desk, and for a second, just a second, I let my guard down. I leaned against the edge of the mahogany, and she reached out, her fingers grazing the back of my hand. It was a small gesture, almost innocent, but the look on her face, soft, open, unguarded, was a smoking gun. The door swung open. Marcus didn't knock. He barged in, holding a tablet, breathless with some urgent triviality about a client email. He froze. Selena snatched her hand back, the movement too sharp, too guilty. Her face hardened instantly into the mask of the shark, but it was a fraction of a second too late. Marcus looked at her hand, then at mine, then at the flushed skin of my neck. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The calculation in his eyes was transparent. He had just walked in on a leverage opportunity. He mumbled an apology and backed out, closing the door with a soft, damning click. The silence that followed was suffocating. The air in the room turned brittle. "He saw," I whispered, the nausea rising in my throat. "He suspects," Selena corrected, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city she had conquered. And in this building, suspicion is enough to launch an inquiry. The threat wasn't just gossip. It was existential. If Marcus talked, it wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was termination for cause. A scandal that would strip Selena of the authority she had spent 15 years bleeding to build. She turned from the window, her face pale but composed. She walked to her desk, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. She slid it across the mahogany toward me. "I've drafted a transfer request," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The London office has been asking for a new head of strategy. I can have it signed and filed by morning." I stared at the paper, the words blurring under the fluorescent lights. "You're leaving?" "I'm removing the conflict of interest," she said, her tone clinical, as if she were discussing a toxic asset. "If I'm not your direct supervisor, if I'm not even on the same continent, HR has no case. You keep your job, you keep your trajectory. The rumors die because there's no oxygen left in the room." "You hate London," I said, my voice rising. "You built this division from the ground up. This is your kingdom, Selena." "It's a job," she snapped, though her hands were trembling where they gripped the edge of the desk. "You are something else. I won't let you do it." I pushed the paper back toward her. "I'm not going to be the reason you exile yourself. I'm the subordinate here. If anyone leaves, it should be me. I can find another analyst role. You can't replace being the shark." "You think I care about the title?" She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. She walked around the desk, closing the distance between us, her eyes blazing. "I can rebuild a career. I can't rebuild this. I won't let them fire you for my lack of self-control. I am the senior partner. The responsibility is mine. I am protecting you." "I don't need your protection," I shouted, the volume startling us both. "I didn't sign up to be a charity case or a liability you have to manage. I signed up to be your equal. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. We handle the risk together. You don't get to fall on your sword just because you think you're the only one strong enough to bleed." She stared at me, stunned by the defiance. The power dynamic shifted again, the tectonic plates grinding against each other. She wasn't the boss in this moment, and I wasn't the analyst. We were just two terrified people standing in the wreckage of a secret. "We can't stay here," she whispered, looking at the door as if the walls themselves were recording us. "If we stay in this room, we're going to say things we can't take back. And Marcus is probably already texting someone." She grabbed her coat, her movements jerky and desperate. We needed air. We needed to be somewhere the walls couldn't hear us. The wind on the rooftop terrace was violent, whipping Selena's coat around her legs and stinging my cheeks with the promise of winter. We were 40 stories up, standing on the maintenance terrace, a grit-covered stretch of concrete usually reserved for HVAC repairmen and smokers. It was the only place in the city where the noise of the streets couldn't reach us, a gray, isolated island floating in the sky. Selena produced a bottle of Macallan 25 from her structured tote bag, a bottle worth more than my first car, and 2 paper cups she'd swiped from the water cooler. She poured with a steady hand, the amber liquid looking ridiculous, swirling in the cheap, wax-coated cardboard. It was a perfect metaphor. High value contained in a disposable world, risking a spill with every movement. "To risk," she said, handing me a cup. "To ruin," I countered, taking it. The whiskey burned going down, a welcome fire against the October chill. We leaned against the parapet, looking out at the skyline. From here, the investment banks looked like glowing, indifferent circuit boards. The silence stretched, heavy with the decision we hadn't made yet. "I'm not going to London," she said, staring at the horizon. and I'm not firing you. So we wait for Marcus to talk? Marcus won't talk. I just promoted him to the Tokyo desk. He leaves tomorrow. I choked on my drink. You bribed him? I incentivized him. That's business. She turned to me, and the wind blew a strand of dark hair across her face. She didn't bother to brush it away. She looked wild, the polished executive dissolved by the wind and the whiskey. But that was a stopgap. We can't keep doing this halfway. The app, the teasing, the messages, it's a game. Games end. I'm tired of playing, and I'm tired of hiding behind a screen. She pulled her phone from her pocket, the Apex interface glowing in the dark. With a single, deliberate movement, she swiped. Account deleted. I don't want ST, she whispered, stepping closer until the toes of our boots touched. I want Selena, and I don't want the silhouette in the window. I want you, right here. Real is dangerous, Selena. Real gets us caught. There's no safety net. Good, she said, her eyes fierce. Safety makes you complacent, and complacency kills returns. I don't care about the board. I care that when I thought I had to leave, I couldn't breathe. She set her cup on the concrete ledge. The distance between us vanished. She didn't ask for permission this time. The consent had been signed in the car, in the office, in every look we'd shared for weeks. She grabbed the lapels of my coat and pulled me in. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It wasn't the careful exploration of the car ride. It was a violent collision. Her mouth was hot, tasting of expensive peat and raw, unfiltered desperation. It was a seal on a pact, a promise we were in this together against the world. I wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her flush against me, feeling her heat burn through the wool and silk. For a moment, the career didn't matter. There was only the taste of her, the grip of her hands in my hair, and the exhilarating realization that I had acquired the only asset that mattered. She pulled back, breathless, her lips swollen, her eyes dark and shining. We keep it secret, she whispered, her forehead resting against mine. Not because we're afraid, but because it's ours. Every time I critique your work, every time I ignore you in the hall, it will be foreplay. You're twisted, I laughed, breathless. I'm efficient, she smirked. And I'm yours. The city looked different from up here. Less like a battlefield, more like a kingdom we had just conquered. The next morning's strategy meeting was brutal. Selena sat at the head of the table, dismantling a VP's proposal with her usual icy efficiency. She didn't look at me once. To the room, we were strangers. But then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down, shielding the screen. Stop looking at my mouth. Focus on the P and L. I looked up. She was deadpan, terrifying, and completely mine. If you crave this kind of high-stakes tension, subscribe for more stories from the top floor.